There is so much to tell about Dr. Kim Williams, Sr., our speaker today. He's an amazing physician, leader, and individual. When we think about his training that he had to become that physician, he attended the University of Chicago and the Pritzker School of Medicine. And his positions after that, as cardiologist, was on the staff at Pritzker. He also was at Wayne State University, and now he's at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, where he is chief of cardiology. His board certifications are numerous. He's not just a cardiologist with board certification or internist. He's got nuclear cardiology and cardiovascular computed tomography. There's 6 of them in total. He's been chair and president of many state and national organizations. He's president of the Society of Nuclear Cardiology. He's done that job. He's the chair of the Association of Black Cardiologists. That's another one he's done. And he's probably best well known for his president of the American College of Cardiology. He's published numerous articles, written book chapters, monographs, editorials, and he's editor-in-chief, I want to get this right, of the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention. He's respected nationally and internationally as the leading figure in the movement to fight cardiovascular disease with plant-based diet. If you Google his name, you're going to find all kinds of YouTube presentations and interviews. The other day, I found one that took place in Canada and Australia, and there's numerous ones from the United States as well. You just can't help but be impressed with his knowledge of the research. And he uses that research with his patients and with his organizations. He looks at data. In fact, when he was president of the American College of Cardiology, he's known for his famous statement of, there are 2 types of cardiologists. There are vegans, and there are those who haven't read the data. We're in luck. He's read the data, and we get to hear it today. Welcome, Dr. Williams.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'm actually in Chicago at the airport, so it's going to be the toughest one I've ever done, I think. There's a lot of background noise that I can't do anything about. Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
So I know that this was set up to be a discussion of a 4-part series of slides that everyone had looked at, and I appreciate that. But on further review, I think I had to call an audible from the line of scrimmage because they actually had a presentation that was more than 6 months old, and this is a field that moves so quickly that I begged permission to share with you an update of, so some of the slides you will have seen before, and I'm sure you've prepared questions that'll be still relevant, but the field has changed enough that I had to start talking about it with the more recent publications. So the topic here is going to be the dual pandemic and how do we dual it? No pun intended. Actually, the puns are always intended. And talking about the fact that, we really shouldn't talk about cardiovascular mortality, even though it's still number 1 in the middle of the COVID-19 issue that we're having around the world, because it turns out that nutrition is a key element for both. Okay, and so this is a slide that if you looked at my previous presentations, it was pretty much aligned this way. It was talking about obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia, talking about how we measure it, how to improve it, and what's the data behind that, particularly with regard to nutrition. But the new twist is that it's like we were just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We were talking about these 4 cardiovascular risk factors. But we weren't talking about what was actually on the inside making it happen. And that actually is the microbiome. I mean, we thought that hypertension was genetics and sodium, and high cholesterol is what you eat and not enough fiber. And the diabetes was your get overload, particularly obesity, central obesity, and your insulin levels drive enough nutrients into cells so that you end up having accelerated plaque and kidney disease and nerves and eyes and all of these complications from having elevated blood sugar because your body doesn't respond to the insulin anymore. And obesity, way too many calories for the amount of calories that people are burning. Well, it turns out all of that was true. It says it was missing one element that's shown on this slide, and that is the microbiome. And so we are going to talk about that a little bit. This is my outline. I'm going to start really talking about what is the microbiome. And I'm sure it'll be a shock to people who haven't been reading about this. I hear that you're going to hear a lot more about it in your group here with upcoming lectures, but you really need to know that more than half your body is not actually human. It is the human cells. If you look at the total cell count, is only 43% of the usual human body. And if you measure cell count, or not just cells, but DNA, the genes, we have about 20,000 genes in the human genome, but there are about 20 million in your body. And what is the rest of it? It's germs, it's bacteria, funguses, the protozoa, and which are little organisms. Sometimes they're parasites, sometimes not, and viruses. And these, and that's assuming that you're in sort of a Western culture that doesn't have a lot of worms. And so you put all that together, you've got a lot of stuff going on. And it turns out that what's the species and the behavior of all of those microscopic organisms actually determine the outcomes of many diseases in human health. It's about your immune system. It's how you digest your food. It's regulating how much food you absorb and the hormones that you're putting out. And believe it or not, how your brain works and how your nerves work, how you get rid of drugs or not, how do you get rid of toxins or not. And the important recognition is that, sure, I'm here to talk about cardiovascular disease, but when you talk about the microbiome, you have to give a lot of respect to the people who've been working in neurology. That is, everybody knows someone who has Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, and sometimes both, autism, multiple sclerosis. All of these have actually been related to having bad bugs in your GI system. And you do have microbiome elsewhere. You have a microbiome on your skin, you have it in your nose, you have it in your mouth. And, tooth decay is really important. But for the diseases that we're talking about, cardiovascular, neurologic, kidney diseases, it's pretty much the GI microbiome, whatever's on the inside of your gut. And so people have been talking about this for a while and trying to come up with things. And you've all heard of taking probiotics. What you may not have heard is that the data is very clear that the probiotics that are out there right now that are over the counter are really not, it's almost like a gimmick. People are, there may be some value to it, but they have not yet proven the value. And when it's been looked at in randomized trials, they don't do much. Now, on the other hand, there are some, there are some conditions where you have really a bad microbiome. You've got, for particularly the one that people have heard about particularly, is Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. You've been in the hospital too long, you had too many antibiotics, and this one thing starts growing, and next thing you know, people are having 30 bowel movements a day, and they're highly infectious. Well, it turns out that you can put the right kind of bacteria in, and that will help tremendously. And so fecal transplants I think, revolutionize this field, that you can actually change the microbiome. This would be typically when your spouse is sick, you're living in the same household, you would actually have your spouse give you stool. But there are now FDA approved poop pills to try to do this as well. But little was it recognized that it isn't just about the bacteria themselves. The bacteria are influenced by lifestyle. And the more you exercise, the better your bacteria are. The more you eat good nutrition, the better your bacteria are. And so, you could come up with all sorts of, messenger RNA and bacteriophage viruses to try to change the microbiome. But healthy lifestyle has to be considered as one of the main reasons main ways to get around all of the things that I'm going to tell you about. So what are those things? The same ones: hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, and obesity. Obviously, in a 20-minute talk, it's going to be hard to go into detail about each one of them. Each one of these would be sort of an hour and a half talk, but there's just showing you snippets. There is data, published data relatively recently, that the high blood pressure that we see every day in so many, particularly in our African-American community, has to do with the microbiome and what kind of bacteria are in your gut. And so sure, there are genetic and environmental factors, and you eat too much sodium, gain too much weight, but they actually affect the microbiome as well. And when you're eating a lot of dietary fiber, that actually does reduce your blood pressure because it changes the bacteria in your GI tract. And having more diversity, good species of bacteria, as opposed to the bad ones listed here. And how do you change the bacteria? Really, diet and exercise. Okay, so excuse me, we're getting a lot more information, and I expect that you're going to see more about this over the next 5 years. And there may be, we get to the point where instead of just using drugs, we actually give poop pills and actually change the microbiome, and the blood pressure is going to come down. And we expect that this is going to change the way that we manage most cardiovascular diseases down the road. So anyway, quick quiz. How many people before you saw this slide had ever heard the term treprostinil? Probably no one, and there's a good reason for that. You don't hear about it because it's just a chemical that goes out in the stool, and it doesn't cause any human disease. Well, it turns out that if you have really good bacteria, the kinds that people who do plant-based nutrition have, they have a large amount of this ISMA gene, and that will actually take your cholesterol, which is so damaging, and we spend all kinds of diet and exercise and drugs, and the drugs are expanding rapidly, injectables and pills to try to lower cholesterol. Well, it turns out that if you have this ISMA gene in your microbiome, you are going to excrete the cholesterol indirectly by changing it from cholesterol 1, 2, 3 steps in its treprostinil. It's not going to go into anybody's arteries, and it's not going to hurt anyone. So we have another opportunity, not just drugs like ezetimibe or statins that can stop you from making it, not just reducing all the dietary cholesterol, but some help from the inside by actually getting rid of the cholesterol by breaking it down into something that doesn't harm human health. How about diabetes? Well, this one has really exploded in terms of the number of studies. And this slide, I'm sure, is old because I did it like 6 weeks ago. It's constantly more and more publications talking specifically about the presence of bacteria in the GI tract that are associated with type 2 diabetes, and those that are actually associated with getting rid of the type 2 bacteria. So it turns out that you're going to see more and more published literature that describes specifically the change in pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes, specifically based on the gut microbiota. Now, this might look like a complicated slide, but it's actually really simple. You have a bunch of bacteria. Some of them are promoting diabetes and some of them are not. And you can see them as red and blue. And this research is going to continue to expand. And again, this is an opportunity for intervention. If we're not doing it with plant-based nutrition, perhaps people will end up taking another type of poop pill that'll change the microbiome. Another complex looking slide is really saying the same thing. With fancy names, the Ruminococcus, Fusobacterium, those are bad ones. Lactobacillus, which many of you have heard of, is actually good for you. And if we focus on the kind of interventions that will take the bacteria and change them to the kinds that will improve diabetes, that's another target, not just giving drugs to lower blood sugar and the like. How about obesity? This is really important because people have to understand that the bacteria actually do determine what's going to happen in terms of obesity. And you can actually take in experimental situations the bacteria from the GI tract in an obese person, and give that to a thin person and they will gain weight. And you could actually do the reverse as well. And so we may see much more in the way of fecal transplantation down the road in order to change the bacteria that are leading to either the prevention or treatment of obesity. And so there are some biochemical factors that make this happen that I won't go into, but I'll suffice it to say that this is an opportunity for us to make a real difference. Now, I want to, if you're not familiar with this four-letter word, TMAO, I want you to at least write it down and put it in your search engine and take a look because it's something that everybody should know about. It's pretty much, if you're knowledgeable about TMAO, you're really going to do plant-based nutrition to avoid this chemical. And it turns out that trimethylamine oxide is the actual compound, and it comes from eating animal products and then having a dysbiotic microbiome that actually changes those compounds into trimethylamine, goes to the liver, gets oxidized, and trimethylamine N oxide is the result. That results in heart attack, stroke, and death. And so this is an opportunity. That was the old slide from like 10 years ago. Now it looks like this. We know so much more about the effects of TMAO, producing diabetes, producing kidney disease, harming the neurologic system as well as cardiovascular, heart attack, stroke, heart failure. And the data is actually very clear that if we want to improve our TMAO levels, the best thing we can do is diet. Change the bacteria in the GI tract and do that by not ingesting the precursors, which happen to come from eating animal protein. Okay. So the gut microbiome here is certainly in the center of this, but we could actually alter by not feeding ourselves the carnitine, choline, betaine in large amounts that come basically from animal products. So what is the correlation between TMAO and disease? Well, first of all, you have to give a lot of respect to them looking at the effects on the bloodstream. The bloodstream has clotting elements called platelets. Those platelets can actually be inhibited by aspirin. And if the aggregation of platelets causing clots is actually the thing that results in heart attacks, et cetera. And that's why aspirin is supposed to be helpful. Well, suppose you have a low TMAO level. That's like a person on a regular American diet, then actually taking an aspirin, and your platelet aggregation is about the same as someone who is doing a plant-based diet without the aspirin. So you're actually lowering the risk by lowering the TMAO level. Here's the data that says that when you have a high TMAO level because you've eaten animal products, you end up with heart attack, stroke, and death. And then they published the heart failure literature. Most of this is out of the Cleveland Clinic. And it's a surprising relationship between the development of heart failure and the TMAO. So that goes a long way to explain the kinds of things that we've known for years. This publication was 10 years ago saying that when you eat red meat, it increases your death. And that's not just cancer, but cardiovascular death as well. And so it's dose related. There is no safe amount that you can eat that doesn't increase your death rate. And the more you eat, the more you die. Well, it turns out that it's a variety of issues, but a lot of it is actually coronary heart disease, as well as the development of heart failure. And if you capture them quickly, you can see the massive amount of data that really goes a long way to supporting that idea that if you aren't vegan, that means that you're not looking at the data carefully or and the important thing about a lot of this research is actually that it's showing the mortality benefit of substituting just about anything for red meat will actually improve the outcomes. With a few exceptions, not every study shows the truth on everything. Fish pretty much is better than red meat, and it's just that fish still has its problems. We have to do a shout out for processed red meat. That is the ham, the bacon, sausage, hot dogs, that sort of thing. That actually has dramatically increases heart failure as well as heart attack, stroke, and death. But heart failure mortality, you're not going to see too many sets of data that says a 243% increase in death if you're eating a certain item. Processed red meat is that thing. If we look for the data on heart failure and what can you do about it, it turns out that plant-based nutrition actually lowers the heart failure in readmissions or hospitalizations by about 41%. For those of us who are in hospitals and are struggling with the heart failure readmission penalties from Medicare, this would be a lifesaver financially. One of the things that people say that you hear over and over again is that, incredible edible egg, that it's actually good for you. Nothing could be further from the published truth. If you look at peer-reviewed investigation, I do like to call JAMA my, vegan propaganda journal. It's not. It's actually very high-level peer-reviewed data, and it's very clear that if you're eating eggs, you're increasing your mortality rate. There is a small amount that you could probably get away with, but it's essentially a linear relationship between egg consumption and mortality. So the people were actually, when this came out a couple of years ago, people said that's only in the United States, the Journal of American Medical Association. It doesn't mean anything for everyone else. Well, it turns out that that was reproduced in Italy. And everywhere it's looked at, if you're eating eggs, you're increasing your mortality rate. And the cut point seems to be about the same, any more than 3 or so. So that actually plays into the Harvard studies that talks specifically about any animal protein causing death. And so this was one of several studies that were also published in the Journal of American Medical Association, and again, largely ignored, saying that there are no safe animal products. It's just that fish and poultry are safer than dairy, which is safer than red meat, which is safer than eggs, which is way safer than processed red meat. And so if people really focus on switching their swapping out the animal protein for vegetable protein, they will decrease not just cardiovascular and cancer, but overall mortality. This data is really coming to light in terms of dietary intervention, particularly in the younger people. We should be starting much earlier, restricting the animal protein any way that we can do that. Because it really does make a big difference in terms of outcomes. It wouldn't be fair to talk about cardiology only without talking about renal disease, because the two are tied. Our kidney disease patients don't die of kidney disease, they die of heart disease. And so what is it that we could do about it? Well, I need everyone who has kidney disease to let their doctor know that in their nephrology literature, in the kidney disease literature, there's all of this data saying very clearly that animal protein is what's killing kidneys. And if we were to stop that and let them know that there's an inverse relationship between plant protein and incidence of chronic kidney disease, that red meat actually kills kidneys and puts people on dialysis. And even our dialysis centers like DaVita are pushing plant-based nutrition now. What is the common element? It's TMAO. That is, the more TMAO you have from your GI tract, the more kidney insufficiency you get and a poorer long-term survival. And so one of the best things that we could do for our kidneys is to switch people to a plant-based really talking a little bit about COVID. Determines whether or not people get sick from COVID. And so I coined this phrase, do we have the guts to go vegan for COVID? Well, it turns out not too many people were paying attention. And diabetes and obesity all increase COVID lethality. And if you want to reduce the severity of COVID-19 illness, the best thing to do is plant-based nutrition. And so we actually have good data on lifestyle saying that smoking is bad, but being body mass index or being obese is actually worse. And then this was published. British Medical Journal saying that plant-based diet is the best way of COVID-19, and the odds of them actually getting sick, moderate or severe illness, is about 7. The more meat and eggs you eat, the more you die of COVID. And so the data is actually very clear. It has to ending up on a ventilator in an ICU and a poor outcome. Numerically true, but statistically, if you correct for the risk factors, economic factors, then being Black or brown actually doesn't increase it. It's all about risk, not about race. So in case people are interested in that, we can actually try to get much better in terms of both vitamin D levels. So that sort of, as I'm closing and opening up for questions, I want to share with you one thing that we did on the south side of Chicago, which was basically try to implement our American College of Cardiology nutrition guidelines that we published in 2019. Again, I have to admit, largely ignored that we needed to be emphasizing more plant-based nutrition to try to get people away from sugary drinks and refined grains, getting rid of cholesterol, saturated fat. And it's tough to go against the culture and what's being promoted on television, but this is what we need to do if we expect to make things better. A 5-week plant-based intervention in that church resulted in a dramatic reduction of all the risk factors you see here, particularly the TMAO that I've spent a lot of time talking about, and insulin levels. And so when we actually put all that data into the risk calculator, that, by the way, you can actually get the ASCVD Risk Calculator on your phone and actually calculate your own risk and all of your family just by putting in all your numbers. And we were able to eliminate a dramatic amount of the risk, provided that they were to stay on it for more than 5 weeks. We've actually been sharing the Association of Black Cardiologists plant-based cookbook with everyone. It's online. You can just look up the Association of Black Cardiologists, Heart and Soul, online, and you can actually download the PDF. So I'm going to finish just by summarizing and saying that it's really about the heart disease, kidney disease, stroke. All of it's increasing. All of it is unnecessary. If we fix the diets, we're going to go a long way to reducing all of these diseases. And in this dual pandemic, we need to do this for ourselves, for our community, for our families, and for our country. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
We do have one question from the Zoom group. You said something about 3 eggs. Is that weak, or, I mean, I think you've said in the past no eggs, but somebody's asking about a husband that doesn't want to give up eggs. What would be like the most least he should eat, or whatever?
Couple things. So in medical statistics, we accept a p-value of 0.05. You'll hear that over and over and over again as the truth. Well, you don't, with a small population, it takes you a fair amount of signal in order to get a statistically significant result. And so in the population studied, it was 3 eggs per week was the cut point that reached statistical significance. But when you look at the graph, there was no safe level. That is, there was an increase. It just wasn't statistically significant. If you multiply that study, that the population by 1,000, put 1 million people in it, of course, you'd reach statistical significance very early. So it's really important to understand the difference between statistically significant and clinically significant. I would not do any eggs because they are associated, clearly associated with the increase in mortality.
A question from Zoom. Linda or Debbie or Michelle?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
I was just going to say, Dr. Delaney is saying that, Gail Delaney is saying that, Dr. Williams, we need you much longer. Can you do a 2-hour session? That's from the chat box.
Thank you very much. But no, I have to get on a plane pretty soon.
How about another time?
Yeah, I'm sure we can work it out.
Great.
Dr. Williams, once you were wonderful to begin with. I just want to confirm, you said that with processed meats, it increases your risk of heart failure by 243%, and a vegan diet reduces your risk of heart failure by 41%?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Nailed it.
Here?
I see one in the chat box. If a person in their 30s already follows a whole food plant-based diet without oil, has LDL levels over 100. Should a low-dose statin be considered? So this is really important that we changed our guidelines. And again, I'm not sure anybody was listening to use our ASCVD risk calculator. Please write that down. ASCVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease risk calculator. Everybody should have it on their iPhone or their however you use your apps, and go through the data with, oh, Uncle Joe, what was your cholesterol last time? And what was your blood pressure? And to tell everybody around you their risk. And so for people in their 30s, the risk is actually fairly low. Our cut point by guidelines for actually doing the statin would be an LDL of 190. Now, if a 30-year-old, which actually is tough to get I think the risk assessment right now goes only down to 40, but they're working on it to try to get it to 30 because there's a recognition that Americans particularly are having heart attacks at younger ages based on the diet. And it turns out that if that person is a smoker with high cholesterol, this is really something that everyone should be considering. And so one of the things that we're doing to determine whether or not somebody needs to be on a statin is to do a coronary calcium score if they are at substantial risk. We don't do the CT scan if the person is at low risk, and we don't do the statin unless the LDL is greater than 190. Or not a question, a comment. My egg-eating husband has low cholesterol. So really important to note that every factor in human biology is sort of on a bell-shaped curve. There are people who are 30 with an LDL of 100, and there are people who on a plant-based diet, and there are people who are going to have, particularly those with a PCSK9 deficiency mutation. Those people are going to have a low cholesterol no matter what they eat. And so it wouldn't necessarily, if you have a very low cholesterol, it does protect you from heart disease. But the other issues of TMAO, such as Alzheimer's, chronic kidney disease, the things that are not dependent upon cholesterol, you wouldn't be protected from those. Okay, I see another question. If you take a poop pill, what diet will be needed to maintain the optimal microbiome? Well, we haven't seen any prospective trials, and I'm always hesitant in cardiovascular medicine to go based on logic because we've been wrong about so many things so many times. It turns out that if the thing that you need to make your optimum microbiome is a whole food plant-based diet, it actually takes only 4 to 14 days. So I'm not sure based on that data that you'd ever need the poop pill unless you had an illness specifically like Clostridium difficile. And you're having those 20, 30 bowel movements a day. Yeah, a poop pill with a good microbiome can actually treat that, as well as the antibiotics.
Dr. Williams, how far are we away from using the poop pills to manage cholesterol instead of statins?
So I'm not we would have to have prospective randomized trials. And when you look at the prostanoid effect, it's only one of several things that happens with diet. It's not the only thing. Increasing the fiber in the diet, decreasing animal products so you're not ingesting cholesterol. You put those three things together, and it actually does sound like, getting the nutrition right is the key. And that's why, but it doesn't work for everybody. So you want to give a lot of respect for statins. Statins get a bad name. And the funny part about it is that the people who are saying that you shouldn't use statins because there's so many side effects, well, I hope they look at the literature published like 4 days ago. That was very clear that the nocebo effect, everybody hears about statins being bad, and then they get muscle symptoms that have nothing to do with statins, and they actually often stop them. Whereas you give them a placebo pill, they get that looks like the statin, and they get exactly the same symptoms because it's taking the pill, actually not the statin itself. That's called the nocebo effect. You can read about that. It was published British Medical Journal last week, published in the New England Journal of Medicine 2 years ago. Okay, but the biggest thing about statin is that people need to know is that it's the reason that Medicare is going broke. I'm not sure everybody knows that, but the trustees have said that Medicare will be broke in 2024. They had predicted 2026 before COVID, but now they're running out of money. And why are they running out of money? Because sick people are taking medications and not dying. And that has to do with statins. There was no way for Medicare to charge premiums, 20, 30 years ago, knowing, because they didn't know that statins were going to come out and change the death rate so dramatically. And so this is really, there's people saying that they shouldn't take statins when you're at high risk and have disease. It's kind of like you're going to do Medicare a favor if you're over 65. That's probably not what we should be doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim Williams, for coming to be with us. I have with us today, we're a citywide mission group that's been in existence for 75 years. It's 9 churches, and we meet once a month at 3:30. We go from church to church, and right now we're not meeting in person, but our executive group is here, and we meet every week. Matter of fact, we'll meet this afternoon at 6 o'clock. So I would like to, our president is not here, but our vice president, Betty Smothers, she's here. If you would stand, Betty.
Hi.
Johnny
Hi, Betty.
McNair, she's our secretary, she's here.
Mm-hmm.
Ernestine Davis, she's a part of our group too, she's here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also a part of that group, and we take care of the business. We're trying to learn as much as we can to try to educate our community. Because again, when you were talking about so many of those diseases, I was thinking so many of us have those kind of things already. And if there is a way to reverse those, hopefully we'll be able to get together and talk about what those things are and help our community. So we so appreciate you talking to us today. We really appreciate the information. And I want to say I appreciate Kathy Thornhill, who has been talking to me about 1.5 years now about what we need to do. So thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this and listen to you. This has been great for us. So thank you again.
Well, thank you very much for being there. And, 75 years, wow. You guys don't look a day over 25. But, so, more seriously, if I could, can I comment on that for a minute? If you give me the floor for just a minute. I know I get myself into trouble talking about this. I had someone hear what I had to say about health equity and cardiovascular disease and the like and Medicare. And they were very upset and they contacted me. And then when I gave them the data, their response was, oh. And so what is it that I said that got them upset? I said that this Medicare going broke thing, this is something that we can fix in our community. This has to do with African Americans having a 21% higher cardiovascular death rate and having it's being 13% of the population and 35% of the dialysis patients. Not everybody knows that the moment you're on dialysis, you qualify for Medicare. Medicare then pays $91,000 per Medicare beneficiary per year for the dialysis. And there's a massive amount of money. And we don't have the tax base because systemic racism or whatever you want to call it, traditionally poor levels of education, less income. We don't have the tax basis to pay that. So everyone else is paying for our dialysis. And so that's what upset people when I said that, but that's just mathematically what the facts are. And so if we wanted to fix Medicare, we need to start in our community and fix the hypertension, diabetes, obesity, the eating patterns that result in the chronic kidney disease. If we do that, that's the best thing we could do to show our patriotism.
Thank you.
Didn't you say that it's our patriotic duty to make ourselves well by our diet and exercise? Didn't you tell us that?
I did say that, and I've been saying that a lot. And but I really need to change that. Now that I have 9 grandkids, I actually am more interested in sustainability. And the 2 big things that people need to know. It's number 1 is a vegan diet that's not whole food plant-based, where you're eating a lot of vegan cupcakes and vegan donuts and vegan ice cream. Those actually increase human mortality more than an animal-laden diet, believe it or not. And so for my animal rights people, they just love it because they say that it protects the animals. you don't get greenhouse gases, and it kills humans. So it's good for the planet. Okay, okay. But the other side of it is a little more serious about sustainability. And, I could tell you all about TMAO and all these different risk factors, but if we don't have a planet that's sustainable, then all of this dietary stuff isn't going to matter. And the one little fact that people aren't paying attention to with greenhouse gases is that it's so much more powerful than carbon emissions from transportation. It's the amount is different, but the effect of methane versus carbon dioxide is actually huge. So guess what? You're getting global warming. You're starting to get melting of the permafrost. And they've actually taken samples of the permafrost. There are bacteria and viruses that the human genome or the humans have not seen for millennia that are going to come out and we're going to be exposed to. That's number one. The other side is, guess what else is coming out of the permafrost? Methane. If methane comes out in large amounts, then global warming is actually going to be self-sustainable. So I've toned down the talk about patriotism. I'm talking about planetary survival. And so if people are actually going to eat irresponsibly, then they have to accept that they don't care about what planet their kids and grandkids are going to live on. Oh gosh. Okay. I started to say this when the person talked about her husband eating eggs. Please go into your search engine and put in the word HDL and mortality. And you'll find that much to our chagrin, we were wrong again in cardiology. We were wrong for 60 years. The so-called good cholesterol is not good. What you'll see is a bunch of U-shaped curves for death rate. We were right about low HDL being a risk factor for death, but high HDL as well. And we didn't know that. And it's, but that's all you can do. Medical knowledge doubles every 73 days. We're going to have a whole lot of medical knowledge that replaces the stuff that we had wrong. And that's one of them. Please, if you have a high HDL, consider yourself at risk. And do everything you can not to get it down. We don't try manipulating it with drugs. Every one of those drugs, whether it was niacin, torcetrapib, dalcetrapib, anacetrapib, every single one of them actually increased mortality, and we weren't getting it. We still didn't get it. That raising HDL is actually bad for you. So just do a whole food plant-based diet, exercise. Don't do a whole lot of alcohol, and whatever your HDL is genetically, leave it alone.
Yes, Sandy was asking about plant milks. Almond and are those good for you? Are they problematic?
Oh my gosh! So really important two major issues that actually are in our guidelines to things to avoid. That's sugar and saturated fat, and so it's really coconut oil and coconut milk that tend to have a lot of saturated fat. If you eat a coconut, sure, there's some saturated fat, but it's not concentrated the way it is when you turn it into coconut milk. Okay. And so the other side of it is taking a wonderful almond milk or soy milk and then putting sugar, corn syrup in it. And so those sweetened plant-based milks, they may taste good, but they're actually not good for you at all. So if you're doing a more a nut milk, for example, there's loads of folks are doing a lot of oat milk and almond milk and soy milk, and those actually are fine if you're not adding the sugar. And just double check everything you're going to eat, at least the first time you buy it, check the back and see how much saturated fat is in it.
Yeah, what did you wear underneath your scrubs and your doctor uniform?
Oh, you mean what gets me in trouble and security all the time? Yeah, I'm wearing tennis clothes. I'm always wearing tennis clothes, always.
So I got right?
Yeah, it's a habit I developed when I was in medical school because I paid for medical school by teaching tennis, and so I was always going from the hospital and to the tennis courts and then back, and so I'm not comfortable if I'm not wearing tennis clothes. So I'm not going to disrobe and show you what it's either, but it's Adidas today or Nike, but I definitely have on tennis clothes, and they don't like it in security because they have to pat me down all the time. But I just tell them and they kind of laugh.
Okay, we'll see what's in the package because it goes with your tips.
So I can open it now?
Yeah, we'll get to open it finally.
Okay. Okay. Oh, this is so wonderful. I got paper and a ribbon. Thank you. I'm supposed to keep opening. Okay. All right. We'll do. Okay. All right. Okay. Oh my goodness. Thank you very much.
Do you know how to use that? It has a little hook on it. Now, I didn't know anything about this. Matt could probably tell us. And you hang it up on the fence. And then when you're served the ball, you can go back and wipe your face.
I see. Thank you. Hang it on the fence. You know, the funniest part about this, thank you very much. You have it engraved with my name. Oh my, thank you so much. That is so nice. Thank you. So there's one more thing I wanted to say. I actually when I detected a person is of the Christian or Judaic faith, I actually talked to them specifically about Genesis 1:29. I wish somebody would make t-shirts, John 3:16, great. How about Genesis 1:29, which basically says that the original design was that people were supposed to eat plants, nuts, seeds, herbs, the stuff that grows on trees. And so I tease my Christian patients that, who aren't doing it. I said, this is what the scripture says. If you don't believe your cardiologist, you got a problem. If you don't believe the word of God, you got a much bigger problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Have a safe flight, and we'll say goodbye to you. And Debbie, give one now and tell us about next events. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Well, that was tremendously fabulous. That's all I can say. It was just totally awesome. And it's going to be hard to beat this next month, but we're going to try to. So next month is Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. And you may not know, but colorectal cancer is the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths in the United States. It accounts for 10% of all cancer deaths in the U.S. And unfortunately, studies have shown that the rate of cancer deaths or cancers among young people, people in their 20s are increasing. So next month we have from the UK, Dr. Alan Desmond, and he's a gastroenterologist over in England. He's going to present It Takes Guts to Improve Your Health. And he's going to be talking about gut health, the microbiome, and immunity, and he's going to be absolutely fabulous. So I know we are going to be posting that in the chat box, the link for that. And Kathy is also going to be advertising it next week when she does her Chat and Chew newsletter. Then to kick off the Healthy Gut Month, I'm going to be doing a Food for Life program called the Healthy Gut Series. It's going to start March 2nd, and it will be at 6 p.m. on Zoom. So that also is going to be posted in the chat box. So please check that out. It is a free class. It is sponsored by Veg Fund, and it should be a tremendous opportunity for all of us to learn more about our gut health. And I think Dr. Williams certainly did show us how gut health impacts all of our body and how important it is. So I don't know that we're going to be talking about poop pills, but I'm not going to say we're not. So anyway, I hope to see y'all on Zoom starting March 8th.